Welcome back to The World Over. I'm Raymond Arroyo in the historic French Quarter. Now, the quarter was largely untouched during Katrina, but just a few blocks away, floodwaters swamped 80% of this city. Now, that is a landmass equal to 8 times the size of Manhattan, just to give you some idea. In the wake of Katrina's passing, it was an apocalyptic scene. The levees gave way, taking nearly 2,000 lives and causing upwards of $151 billion of damage.
President said, little fat man, oh, isn't it a shame what the river have done to this poor farmer's land? Oh, Louisiana, Louisiana, you're trying to wash us away. You're trying to wash us away. Oh, Louisiana, oh, Louisiana, you're trying to wash us away. Oh, Lord, you're trying to wash us away. You're trying to wash us away. You're trying to wash us away.
As a native New Orleanian watching my hometown, the geography of my life literally drowned, was both traumatic and infuriating. But even in the chaos, the seeds of New Orleans' rebirth were all around. Not long after the storm, we found residents in the devastated neighborhood of Lakeview, determined to rebuild even as their car had been relocated to the pool.
We will pick up where Hurricane Katrina left us off and hope for the best. I'm optimistic.
All over the city, citizens began to rebuild their lives with tenacity and something more.
I mean, I don't know how anybody gets through this without faith.
10 years later, New Orleans has bounced back with her rhythm and spirit intact, as the city's mayor, Mitch Landrieu, was eager to share with us.
It's a great story of a comeback for an American city, a story of tragedy to triumph, a story of resurrection and redemption, of people in a city that were left for dead, that found a way through the generosity of other people, you know, through grace, through just hard work and sheer character and determination, to rebuild the city, not the way it was, but the way she always dreamed she could be.
There is now a brand new university hospital and medtech corridor in downtown New Orleans. Graduation rates are up in the city's schools.
We took this as an opportunity not to put the schools back the way they were before, the day before Katrina hit. So we had old schools, 50 years old, and instead of taking the money and just putting plaster on the wall, we've physically rebuilt most of the schools in the city of New Orleans. So now we have 21st century learning centers. Government is working much better than it did before. And so the city is beginning to come back in a way that people, I think, never expected. As a matter of fact, you had some people that said, well, look, what's wrong with those folks down there?
Right.
You know, God visited that upon them because they're evil.
They're such bad people.
Those are bad people, and they should leave. And that's until Sandy came, when we realized that it really wasn't a geographically centered.
That's right. Hurricanes hit everybody.
Hit everybody. So I'm very happy with the recovery. It took us a while to get on our feet. The recovery was anything but a straight line. But I think in the last couple of years, you've seen the city of New Orleans is now, for the first time in 60 years, what I call an ascendant city. Forbes magazine, Wall Street Journal. Everybody says it's the fastest growing city in America. People from all over the world came, and many of them stayed, so there's a new entrepreneurial spirit. All of those things are taking place. So that I think people who really haven't been paying attention because they've been busy just kind of living their daily lives would come to New Orleans, sit in amazement and say, wow, how did they do that?
Yeah.
It's a good story.
A part of that good story can be found here at the center of the French Quarter. When Hurricane Katrina made landfall here behind the St. Louis Cathedral in the St. Anthony Garden, that iconic statue of the Sacred Heart of Jesus lost its fingers. Magnolia trees and sycamore trees thrown by the storm lobbed the fingers off. They were located by the former Archbishop Philip Hannon and members of the 82nd Airborne Division. Now, those fingers were not reattached to the statue. A decision was made to only reattach them once the city and the church had been restored. That time has now come. Archbishop Gregory Aymond of New Orleans.
My predecessor, Archbishop Hughes, said that he would leave the fingers off and not restore them as a sign of the recovery. And though we know the recovery is not complete, but it's 10 years later that we do commemorate. And so we're restoring the fingers for two reasons: to give thanks and honor to those who allowed Jesus to use their hands to help us to recover and to rebuild. Also to give thanks that God's hands have helped us to rebuild, and we're grateful to God. But also to remember that for some people, they're still rebuilding.
Right.
The devastation is so great, and it's not just the physical devastation, or the devastation of house or business, but it's also broken hearts and sorrow and grief that some people are experiencing. Over almost 2,000 people died, their lives were taken. So in my mind, the fingers also say the work is not finished, and that we want Jesus to continue to use our hands and our hearts to do the final chapters that this recovery will bring about.
How has it changed this community spiritually? How has it changed the church in New Orleans? Has that Katrina experience made it a more vibrant, responsive church?
I think so, without a doubt. I think that obviously Katrina took the lives of people, many buildings, an infrastructure, which we had. It's taken all of that. But as I like to say, it has not taken the faith of the people, and Katrina did not take away from us perseverance. And that faith and perseverance has been very much present. And it was really the Catholic churches in many, many neighborhoods that were the first to open.
The anchor.
They were the ones, they became the anchor. They were the ones who said, God loves us, we must move on. And sometimes people ask me all the time, well, you know, where was Jesus in the midst of all this?
Right.
You know, did Jesus care? And I always image in my own mind this Jesus of love walking in the floodwaters with people in their attics as the water keeps coming up and they don't know if they're going to live, hanging on to trees, those who lost their lives. And I really see Jesus weeping, crying, very much compassionate to all that was taking place. We were not abandoned. And even those who have lost loved ones, or they've lost everything, they see a God who has helped them to get through the most traumatic moment in their lives.
In fact, in the wake of the storm in 2005, former Archbishop Philip Hannon, then in his 90s, accompanied rescue teams, including the 82nd Airborne Division. He'd served with them during World War II. He embedded with these early responders, helping to secure the city and rescue her residents. Louisiana Senator David VITTER, who is running for governor.
You know, we all know the horror stories of Katrina, including stories of massive government failure, and that was all too real. But for every one of those, there was a really inspiring story of individual citizens and non-government groups, including the Catholic Church, that just stepped up in a major, major way and reached out to believers all around the country, and they flooded in and brought all sorts of people and resources. And the Catholic Church led that effort. They also led the effort in terms of being just spiritually strong and giving people hope and uplifting them in terms of their spirit. So that was really critical.
Right after the water went away, the sun came up. Like they say, that, you know, joy cometh in the morning. Yeah. There was another flood, and the flood was the people of goodwill, people of faith, people of civic responsibility came into the city and said, look, it's my responsibility to help. Whether it was the young man who was actually cooking on a grill outside of Harrah's, who wound up on the first day feeding 3 people, and then before the end of the week had set up something where he was feeding 5,000 first responders, just with contributions that came in. He came from a church in Daphne. Or a guy that I met on the corner of St. Charles Avenue and Napoleon who was rescuing people. He was a minister from Dallas. Churches from all over the country sent people into the city. So not only was it individuals, but then institutions helped as well, and it was just a beautiful thing.
Tell me about the volunteerism we saw in the wake of Katrina. There were people from all over the United States, all over the world, who came in to help. Catholic Charities really was at the switching posts of all of this, guiding more than 60,000 volunteers in their rebuild efforts, and it goes on. Were you surprised? Were you stunned by the continuance of this?
I was stunned by it, and Catholic Charities did heroic work, and very often we forget that. Also, it was individual parishes that were trying to put together programs to invite people back. It was the individual parishes that were the first to bring the communities back. But even today, as recent as 3 or 4 weeks ago, there was a group in town from the East Coast who was here to help in any way that they could, and they specifically said, if there's anything we can do to continue to help rebuild after the Katrina incident, even though it was 10 years ago. So there are still people coming back using their hands and their hearts, thousands upon thousands of people, together with our own local people who have rebuilt this community.
Throughout the city, there is new construction. Some houses have been lifted off the ground in case of future flooding. There are signs of rebuilding all over this city, but there is one lingering problem that predates Katrina: potholes. Some 650,000 of them all over this city. And if your eye doesn't see them, your car will certainly feel them. Your administration has identified 650,000 potholes in the city of New Orleans.
Sure.
What are you doing about it?
We had $150 billion of damage. We got reimbursed for $71 billion. We have used that limited amount of money. We've completely redone every major street in the city of New Orleans. But the interior streets, which are built on swamps, continue to deteriorate. We've filled 170,000 potholes. Massive infrastructure issue that's going to cost $9 billion. So we can't do everything all at one time.
I think our recovery in the last 10 years has been wonderful, really strong, really by any measure. The one big exception to that is violent crime in New Orleans. That's the Achilles heel. That could threaten everything. And we sure as heck didn't survive and rebuild and recover to turn our great city over to the thugs.
Crime here in New Orleans remains a real source of concern for the citizens that have come back, and it seems every day there's a murder, every day there's 2 or 3 holdups. It's unbelievable. To what do you attribute that?
We need stronger leadership and more of a focus, and I've been very direct about this, including with Mayor Landrieu. You know, he's focused the last 3 months on monuments. Last I saw, the Robert E. Lee statue has not shot anyone, natives or tourists, in that part of the city. Leadership is about focus and priorities. We need to focus on murders, not monuments, because it is an epidemic.
Following racially motivated shootings in South Carolina, Mayor Landrieu advocated removing monuments of figures associated with the Confederacy from the streets of New Orleans. At the same time, the city's murder rate is twice the national average. I spoke to Senator VITTER earlier about this. He says this is your leadership, that you're somehow failing, and that you shouldn't be focused on monuments. Robert E. Lee never shot a tourist or a local. You would say what to him?
Well, Robert E. Lee only tried to completely disassociate this country from itself and continue to have the institution of slavery, which is the worst thing that's ever happened in the United States of America. I mean, so the issue of the Civil War and the Confederates and the monuments and how New Orleans wants to remember itself is something separate and distinct from whether or not we have crime on the streets of America. I just came from visiting Chicago, Atlanta, Houston. On the front page of every paper was an incident that happened in those cities like the one that happened in the city of New Orleans. I will say this, that the federal government in 1996 was providing, you know, hundreds of millions of dollars in police officers for cities across America. They stopped doing that. They cut the funding by 88%. But when you got to get on the front end of this, this is also about early childhood education. It's about strong families. It's about institutions that matter. And so I'm thrilled to have a partner. I'm thrilled that David wants to now work with me on reducing violence on the streets of America.
Well, his focusing on not enough federal money is sort of ironic for a couple of reasons. Number one, New Orleans has gotten more federal taxpayer help because of Katrina than any American city in history. Number two, my record of working on that and producing that is precisely the same as that of his sister, who I work with. Now, we have a very different record on other issues, but on that, it was the same, so it's pretty ironic for him to criticize that. At the state level, what I've said is I actually want to go beyond what the state police have been doing. I want to establish a whole new additional state police troop in the city of New Orleans, focused on key high priority areas like the French Quarter, but it has to be paid for with local revenue and local tourism funds. And that is possible. In fact, The city and tourism industry are working on it because it is such a desperate situation.
As a matter of fact, today, we are in the middle of a prosecution in federal court of one of the toughest gangs in the city of New Orleans who have killed people because we've been working on this for 5 years. So I tell him welcome. And by the way, it was my suggestion that we have the state police in the quarter, and I'm thrilled that as the governor, he's going to help me get it done.
Politics aside, all parties agree that education is one of the bright lights of the New Orleans recovery. It's a charter school system which affords parents real choices in where to send their children. This place seems to be a national model. Tell me about what's happened here. With the charter schools, you only have 6 public schools here. Everything else is charter. Your graduations are up, your enrollment is up. Is this a model for the rest of the country?
Most of our schools were failing and our kids were not learning. After the storm hit, it was completely unfortunate. Every building got destroyed, everybody lost their job because the storm did that. And so we had to redesign a system. And when we did that, quite frankly, we didn't want to get into a big fight about vouchers.
Yeah.
And we didn't want to get into a big fight about public schools. We just wanted a model that worked. And we went to what's called the charter model. Now, these are public schools,
right,
but they're charter schools inside the public arena. And so what we found is that where you have not a school board that kind of oversees from the top, right, an entire system, but a school board that just manages a system of schools that have place-based authority and autonomy, where the principal has the ability to hire and fire, and they hire teachers based on great stuff. When there's accountability of some sort for students and for teachers, where parents have some level of choice, right, in the system, it's produced a higher graduation rate, a lower dropout rate. It's produced an achievement gap that has been closed between kids in the inner city and kids outside of the city. And so it has worked better for us.
You know, the Orleans public school system was on its back, failed before Katrina. Problem is, politically, folks in New Orleans wouldn't admit it. Katrina washed that away, and everybody had to admit it because it was decimated physically as well as being failed educationally. And so it created the opportunity for all of these young people coming in, like Teach for America, for all of these charters, for choice in so many different categories of education, including voucher scholarships, including charters. So it really is a model, and it's a model I want to expand as governor. I want to expand every possible element of choice as long as we do it fairly, because choice ultimately is about empowering parents and families.
Now, it's not without its problems. We have challenges with special education. We have challenges with suspensions. We had challenges with employer-employee relationships, with teachers being let go in a way that people didn't think. So there was some hiccups to it, and there's some consternation about it, and the system is still run by the state. It's got to come back to the city. How we do that, when we do that, is all kind of part of what I call process, which should not be part of the discussion anymore, is this very simple fact. Every child has a right to a great education, and we need to provide that opportunity for them. We think we have a 21st century learning capability now, and we think that we've seen the progress.
The city has also seen progress in fortifying its flood protections. $14 billion of federal monies have been spent rebuilding levee walls, creating new pumping stations, and streamlining drainage systems. But is it enough? We are here in the lower 9th Ward. We're doing the interview today. Now, this area has been rebuilt. A lot of federal dollars went into rebuilding the beautiful courthouse, the fire station, the hospital on the way in. Billions of dollars. Are you confident that this area would be able to sustain a Category 2 or 3 storm?
Well, I'm confident that our protection is far better, planets apart, from what it was the day before Katrina. I am confident of that. Will we ever have flooding again? I can't say we never will. But you know, a key part of a good protection system is even if you get overtopping, you don't have breaches. Overtopping is one thing, breaches is a whole nother category. And where we are in St. Bernard, we had massive breaches, whole miles of levees washed away. I'm confident we're not gonna see that. The recovery here, as in New Orleans, Lower 9th, other places, has been really, in some ways, nothing short of miraculous, but we have further to go.
Ann Milling founded a grassroots group called Women of the Storm. Milling and her group personally invited members of Congress to see New Orleans for themselves after Katrina. they continue to raise awareness today.
Well, do I feel safe? Well, I feel safer than I did because I know all of those eye walls became T-walls in the canals. I know that we have improved the pumping system, and that has been enhanced tremendously. The levees have been enhanced. Is it perfect? No. Will it ever be perfect? No. And of course the wetlands, which are disappearing at the rate of 1 football field. Every hour we lose that much of our wetlands. That's what's so frightening.
The coastal wetlands and barrier islands act as a buffer when the big storms head for the Gulf Coast. They're vanishing at an alarming rate. 200 square miles of wetlands were lost in Hurricanes Katrina and Rita alone.
Every mile of wetlands cuts down storm surge probably about a foot. So that is the first barrier that we depend on before that storm surge gets to levees and man-built barriers. So we need to turn that corner and restore wetlands. The good news is we have a plan, we're on a path to do that. Broadly speaking, there are a couple of big types of projects that are necessary. One is river diversions.
Right.
You know, before a lot of population, we didn't have levees, and the river would overflow every spring and rebuild wetlands, rebuild the mouth of the river. We levied the river for obvious reasons. We had to with population, and that was necessary, but that takes all that rich nutrient material and pushes it out to the middle of the Gulf of Mexico, where it, by the way, creates a dead zone because it's so concentrated, and we aren't rebuilding land. Well, we need to artificially and in a controlled way recreate that process through diversion projects at select locations. So that's one big thing. The other big thing is we need barrier island projects. Things like that. So those are some of the key elements of the master plan.
Natural and man-made challenges await, but on this 10th anniversary of Hurricane Katrina, the people of New Orleans, the people who rebuilt their city, are looking forward to the future with a tested faith.
Yeah, it is very much lived, and it's rooted in a rich Catholic tradition. It's rooted in the victory of the Battle of New Orleans 200 years ago, when the battle, Andrew Jackson, the commander, said, we won't win this battle, and it was won. And not being a man of faith, he went to the Ursuline convent and said God had something to do with this. And it was through the intercession of Our Lady of Prompt Succor. And he gave in to that and said, okay, that kind of tradition infiltrates all that we are. But there is an understanding and an appreciation for Catholicism. And that is seen everywhere. I mean, the names of streets. You know, our counties are called parishes. They're called civil parishes. We always have to make a distinction between the civil parish and the church parish.
The church parish, right?
So there really is, and also humbly to me, you know, when I deal with other faith leaders, they will often say, we really need you to be a part of this, because they realize that the Catholic Church has a voice that's very loud, that is respected, and we take that very seriously. I certainly take that very seriously as a leader.
This week, Archbishop Raymond held an interreligious prayer gathering at the cathedral to give thanks for the recovery and to pray for what lies ahead.
We had Katrina, which took human life and took property and so forth, but now one of the great issues that we have in our own city is murder and violence and racism. And because of that, I have asked us as a church to recite at every Mass, every Sunday, what we call the family prayer. And it's asking God, through the intercession of Our Lady of Prompt Succor, who has helped us in times of war, disaster, epidemic, and illness, to pray with us and to pray for us, that we can become a more peace-filled society. And we have to meet that challenge with faith as well.
And so the Gulf Coast and New Orleans goes on. Like some grand second line, the city is not only back on her feet, in many ways she's dancing. All the officials and the Archbishop expressed their gratitude to the millions of people around the country and the world who helped make it happen. They contributed so much in response to this unprecedented disaster. For me personally, I still can't watch the pictures of the devastation following Katrina. All of us who lived through that storm lost so much. The stuff was easily replaced, but the memories and the people that went down in those foul waters, we continue to miss them terribly. We'll keep watching the Gulf Coast and the New Orleans recovery and pray that we never see a storm like this one again.